Um, Good morning, everyone. Uh, Today we gather to address a crisis that is widely misunderstood. Some are familiar with it, some believe they understand it, but most cannot truly grasp its severity. We're here to discuss the alarming escalation of financial sextortion targeting our youth, a dire situation that FBI Director Wray described as a rapidly escalating threat. As we're all aware, the world has grown increasingly complex and divided, often pushing us towards polar extremes, a phenomena that we study at the Network Contagion Research Institute. Yet amidst these challenges, one universal truth remains steadfast despite all of our disagreements. We all love our children, and that's why we're all here today. My name is Alex Goldenberg. I serve as the Director of Intelligence at the Network Contagion Research Institute. Today, we confront the alarming rise in financial sextortion, crisis largely fueled by cybercriminals in West Africa. These perpetrators exploit social media platforms, weaponizing them against our own children. They share blackmail scripts, collaborate on tactics, and openly brag about their exploits online, increasingly employing advanced technologies like generative AI to expand their reach. As these trends evolve, our approaches must adapt accordingly. It is a relatively new challenge for some local law enforcement officials to address deadly crimes targeting minors committed by perpetrators who are not just out of the state, but thousands of miles away. In the next hour and a half, we will not simply review established protocols or discuss traditional best practices. This is a new phenomena. There aren't many best practices yet. We are here to facilitate collaboration and create solutions in response to an unprecedented wave of financial sextortion. This session is dedicated to those who have been most profoundly impacted, the parents. By sharing their stories, we not only honor their children, their courage, but also ignite our collective resolve. The parents joining us today have suffered unimaginable losses. For them to participate today is undoubtedly difficult, but when we asked, their commitment was unwavering because this is how they fight back. Today's sessions will cover three critical areas. We will start with a discussion from parents whose children were victims of this crime. Next, experts from child protection agencies and researchers will present what we currently know about the scope and mechanics of these crimes. And we will conclude with insights from law enforcement, technology, and financial sectors, discussing what solutions are being implemented and what further actions are needed immediately to combat these threats effectively. We will also leave time for a Q&A. Moderating our session is Mark Albert. During his 25 years in journalism, he won a Peabody Award and Emmy Awards, was an on-air correspondent at CBS News, and created and led National Investigative Unit for Hearst Communications. He now runs a media advisory experts, a media training and crisis communications firm. I also want to extend my deepest thanks to organizations who have co-hosted this critical endeavor: the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Canadian Center for Child Protection, the Rutgers University Miller Center, Crime Stoppers, the Global Consortium of Law Enforcement Training Executives, Operation Lightshine, the Do It for James Foundation, Police One, Intelligence for Good, the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, and the Less Than Free Foundation, and the Amanda Todd Legacy Society. I also want to thank everyone that has taken the time today to join us for this webinar, and NCRI analysts Paul Raphael and Cole McCann for your hard work on our report on this topic and for coordinating this important effort. Mark, off to you.
Alex, thanks very much, and welcome to everybody on this webinar. As Alex mentioned, the goal here is collaboration and solutions. We don't want you simply to sit here for 90 minutes and hear a bunch of talking heads. We want you to get actionable intelligence and have solutions that you can begin to implement today to deal with this in your communities. One of the stats that really struck me that Paul and Alex posted in advance of this webinar is that in 2018, so simply 6 years ago, a nationwide study found that less than 5% of teens had been victims of sextortion. In 2023, so 5 years later, Snapchat study found that almost half, 47% of Gen Z, have been catfished in the past 3 months, with nearly half of those, 44%, sending a compromising photo. As the FBI had said, it is an explosion, and we here on this call are committed to doing something about it. We want to begin with our first panel, which is the most compelling. It is with families and parents who have tragically been affected by this. I'm going to introduce the panelists that we have with us today, and then we will jump right in. John DeMay is the father of Jordan DeMay. John is a former police officer. His son, Jordan, was a sextortion victim and died by suicide March 25th, 2022. Thank you very much, John, for being here with us today. We
Morning.
also have Tim and Tamia Woods. They are the parents of James Woods, 17 years old. They started the Do It for James Foundation simply 2 months after they lost James. They recently received an honor from the FBI for the work that they've been doing, and so far, they have given away more than $12,000 in scholarships. They're hoping to double that this year. Thank you both for being with us on this webinar. Brandon Guffey, he is the father of Gavin Guffey, 17 years old, who died in July of 2022 due to sextortion. Brandon now has started a nonprofit, Less Than Three. You can reach that at lessthan3sc.org. He now travels around speaking to teens about the dangers of sextortion and mental health. And Brandon is a state representative in South Carolina. Thank you for joining us. Carol Todd is the mother of Amanda Todd, 15 years old, the first widely known case of non-financial sextortion, death by an international criminal. And she is joining us today as well. Carol, thank you so much for being here. And Roz Dowie, she is joining us from Scotland. Her 16-year-old son, Murray, was a victim of sextortion and took his own life as a result in December. Roz, thank you for being here. John, I want to start with you on this panel. Can you please tell us about Jordan? Take us back and tell the audience what happened.
Yeah, good morning. It's a really pleasure to be here, and it's also saddening too. And I know a lot of the folks on this panel, and got to meet some of these great people and done some collaboration. So it's good to see y'all in that regard. But yeah, so Jordan was about 6 or 8 weeks from his 18th birthday, getting ready to graduate high school. Amazing athlete, dual sport athlete, basketball, football, played baseball for many years early on, honor roll student. All conference basketball player. He's just an amazing young man. He just had a heart of gold. He was ready to fly the coop and start the second big chapter of his life. And unfortunately, it was held short with a horrible tragedy. And most of the folks on this call, I think, are law enforcement teams and that nature, so everybody kind of understands what the situation was. But Jordan's was pretty much similar to everyone else. The scripts are same, and they're professional at it, and they're persistent. And Jordan received his first text message at 10:15 on a Thursday night, and it was just a simple hi from a young lady on Instagram. And he started conversations with her. It led into increased sexual type conversations, and a little after midnight, he sent his first compromising photo. When that happened, the light switch hit, and the extortion happened, and they extorted him until 3:45 when he shot himself in his bedroom on Friday morning. We were planning to that morning, that afternoon, we were leaving for Florida for 2 weeks on vacation. Jordan and I love going to the beach, and we were heading down to Florida for a family vacation, and it was something that we always look forward to every year, and it was one of his favorite places on the planet. So it was quite shocking that when I woke up that morning and found him in his bedroom, that this had happened. It was just what happened, why there was no signs. He was packed, ready to go. We were leaving, and here we are dealing with this. It was absolute tragedy. And that morning, I have 2 young girls, my wife, and we packed our stuff up that afternoon and went to my in-laws and really never went back. We subsequently sold that home and built a new home that we just moved into about 3 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks ago. So our life has completely changed, but along that journey has been a lot of awareness and trying to get the message out, like the other families on this panel, to make people aware of this. You know, we just passed our 2-year mark, and thankfully for us, we were able to make arrests in our case with the great help of the FBI and the EFCC in Nigeria. 3 people were indicted out of Lagos, Nigeria, and 2 of which are in the United States and actually just pled guilty in federal court in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 2 weeks ago. And we have one person left in Nigeria that's being extradited, but they're fighting their extradition in Nigerian courts. So hopefully we'll see them in the United States soon. There's actually 3 others that were part of our conspiracy that were charged and being held in Nigeria and tried in Nigeria courts. There were 6 men involved in my son's death and that night, but 4 of which were in the room communicating and conspiring to extort money from my son.
And John, your story illustrates that there is something for law enforcement to do, even when these cyber criminals are overseas. So let me just ask you, do you feel as though law enforcement initially took your case seriously? Do you feel as though anything changed when they determined where these cyber criminals were located?
Yeah, and law enforcement took it very seriously, but you know, as a law enforcement professional, you walk into these scenarios and it's an obvious situation. You know, it was an obvious suicide, and the investigation started as such and ended as such as at that day. There really wasn't anything to change that theory, but the giant question mark is, why would this kid do this? I mean, he was happy, he was a great student, he was a great athlete, everything was great. He was going on vacation today, like all these things. But we were very fortunate because the extortionist made one mistake, and that mistake was that they actually sent the compromising photo to his girlfriend, and were trying to extort her as well, which she found out later in the day. That picture came to our attention the next day. That picture then went to our local detective who was handling the initial case, and then obviously as soon as they saw the photo, they had recognized what it was, and it went to the FBI. At that point, search warrants were sent to, or preservation warrants were sent to Meta originally, I believe through the sheriff's department, and they were denied under the Emergency Procedures Act that they have, their guidelines. So I believe the FBI took the paper, probably put it on their letterhead, and resubmitted it, and was able to get the information and actually obtain the full transcript of the conversation from Instagram. And then they realized, you know, after reading it, what had transpired. So law enforcement did an amazing job. They picked up the ball right away. I mean, this played out Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and our local detective and the FBI agents were on it all weekend trying to get this information downloaded from Meta, which they eventually got. So you just have to take that extra step and push through, and it's hard to get search warrants, but we were fortunate to get one, and it really cracked everything open for us. So
take that extra step and push through. Thank you very much, John, for sharing that with us. Tim and Tamia, I want to go to you next. Can you tell us about James? And I also want you, if you could please, to tell our attendees here what you found on his devices afterward.
Yeah, so just to give you all an idea, and we'll definitely tell you how wonderful James was. Of course, our opinion is biased, but we have a lot of people to back us up. Every time someone asks about James, I truly smile because he was just a wonderful young man, and I will forever be proud to be his mother. But James was sent 200 messages in 19 and a half hours. And during those messages, we had found that they instilled suicidal thoughts. So the same as my good friend John and Brendan, Carol, and nice to meet you, Ross. But he didn't have any depression symptoms. He didn't have any issues or signs of suicide. And by the time that James passed away, he had every single sign. And these people are master manipulators, as we all know. They are professional con artists. And a lot of times, as John has stated, that there is more than one person attacking our children. Just wanted to read off an example of a text message that was sent to James. It states, I am more determined to rot your life. I want to make it a waste, a trash can, a shame, a dishonor, a hell, a real disaster, a hell on earth. And also, I remind you that I am heartless. I have no pity to rot a life as well as yours. That was one message out of 200 that was sent to our son. And we just want to make sure that people are aware that a lot of people say, well, why don't these people ever say anything? Why don't they speak up? And we have to realize that our children, once these people attack and start attacking our children, they become sexually assault victims. And not not even 30% of sexually assault victims ever speak up. And we have to keep that in mind. We put so much pressure on our children, and we think that they will come to us at any given time, but yeah, if they have a hole in their sock. But when they become a sexually assault victim, it's just a totally different mindset. But we definitely want to speak about James, because James was a wonderful person, and we want to make sure that that is spoken.
Yeah, he was a fantastic person. Everybody who knew him, they loved his personality. They liked having him around. He was always happy and smiling. You know, he made friends everywhere he went. He didn't care what color you were, how much money your family did or didn't have. He had friends with disabilities. You know, he was always helping people. He had manners. He was responsible. He was a truly independent person. He was on his way to being a productive citizen in society. And these people that got a hold of him, they undid everything that his mother and I did for him in less than one day. They took everything that we had and said, get rid of it. We're going to instill these thoughts in your mind instead. They turned him into a person who was sad. He was mentally tortured. You know, he was depressed. He felt isolated. He felt like he had no hope. And everything that we put in him for those 17 and a half years was destroyed. It was like everything we did was for nothing. These people, they don't care what they do. They just want money. They don't care who they hurt. They don't care what anybody's plans are. They just want to make sure they get what they want at whatever cost. They have no risk really, because they're overseas. They're protected by their own governments. Our guys can't get to them the way that they should. We have to go through all these laws and whatnot just to get them here. As John DeMay said, he said there were 6 people that attacked his child, but for some reason, because of laws, we're handicapped. You know, it's just it's sad all around. Nobody should have to experience the loss of their child.
Yeah. And we unfortunately didn't know anything that was happening to James during this time. Um, he was on his phone, but of course, what kid is not always on their phone? Um, James and I, we actually went to a college fair that same morning, and he told me he chose three. It dwindled down to 3 colleges: Howard, Fisk, and Central State. He was even thinking about joining a fraternity. That day, he went and got his hair cut, and he was even texting and joking around with his friends. The last words that I will always remember is that those words where he was stating what colleges he was going to. And I told him I was so proud of him and I knew he could do it. And that was the last time I ever spoke to my son. Tim and I, we went right into action when they took James. We also gave them James' phone. They attacked James through Instagram. And we gave the police James' phone with the code. They did their research, but Tim did his. So he pulled the phone records. We saw a phone number that wasn't normal, that wasn't usually used to seeing. We called it. That person picked up and then hung up, and then proceeded to text us James' private areas with his face in that picture, and started trying to extort us that way. I we were trying to get more information. We still didn't know what sextortion was. I never heard of it. I didn't know that it existed. And that is what captured our kid. We in turn, we found out James passed away November 19th, November 20th. We found out what happened to James November 21st. Tim and I started raising awareness right away. It was initially out of fear because I didn't know who was next. What is this game that people are playing, and who's going to be attacked? But then we started the Do It for James Foundation. In honor of James, we found that if we spoke out and if we told people our stories, how much it would save other people, and it really did instantly. It saved 4 people in a matter of a couple of months. And we know this specifically because they said, I wouldn't have told you, Mom, if I didn't know James' story. And so that is exactly what we do. That's our motto. We're going to encourage our kids to speak up. We tell the kids that we love them, that they matter. We created tip cards that we hand out. We've handed out over 50,000 tip cards. James' last Google search was how to get an Instagram page shut down. He was trying to figure out how to fight, how to get through it, and he couldn't figure it out. And so many emotions, fear, and everything else he was dealing with. We don't ever want kids to feel that way. We don't ever want kids to deal with the torture that James had to deal with. So we're being preventers and not firefighters. And we send out all of those cards that had specific instructions on it, and we'll continue to fight in the honor of our only son, James. So although our story is sad, James is a beautiful, beautiful person. And I tell all of our parents, our kids are busy fighting. So they're busy up there still.
Well, thank you both for sharing. And those tip cards, Tim, can you hold them up again? These are laminated, correct? So they're almost indestructible. And if anybody
Yes.
wants one of those cards, they can go to the Do It for James Foundation, correct?
Yes, yes, they can go to www.letsdifj.org and you can order. It's just $2 a tip card, just for us to keep things moving. The yellow is for parents. So we always taught the kids to go to a trustworthy parent, trustworthy adult. Everybody knows everyone's parent is not someone that they can go to. So we tell them to find someone, coach, teacher, neighbor, aunt, uncle. But then we realized we didn't give the parents or the adults the proper tools that they needed if they were ever to get that information. So we created the yellow. The gray is for minors under 18. On the back, it has a website for them to go through. Of course, it's through the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children where they can make a report. And the FBI here in Cleveland has stated the kids are actually starting to self-report off of this tip card, which is amazing. And then we don't want to forget our children, especially our new freshmen that are going to college and just now moving out the house. So we created a red one, and we know after 18, unfortunately, nude pictures are legal. So it's a different reporting mechanism. So we wanted to make sure that those young adults are still taken care of, and even adults. We all are. There's no age to being victims of sextortion. So
$2 to possibly save
$2.
$2. Thank you both. Brandon Guffey, I want to go to you next. If you can tell us about Gavin, and particularly, did you see any warning signs? Was there any hint at all?
No, Gavin was living his best life, I say. He had recently gotten saved the week prior, going off to a Christian camp, and just come back a different young man. He was ready to go off to college. He was finally confident in who he was. And, his messaging started on July 27th, right at midnight of 2022. And 1:40 a.m. he had taken his life. I think with him, this was something that wasn't heard of. The threats were very ugly, should I say. And even the week dealing with after Gavin's suicide, my 16-year-old son, his brother started getting extorted. 14-year-old cousin started getting extorted that lived an hour away. And then they went as far to send me a message on what would have been Gavin's 18th birthday saying, "Did I tell you your son begged for his life?" with the laughing face emoji. These are cruel and heartless people. I've turned my life to, and I tell people all the time, I've spoke with Tim and Tamia and John multiple times, but I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm putting one foot in front of the other and talking as much as possible, spreading awareness, getting some legislation passed. I'm working on the federal level, on the state level, to do whatever I can, and really even through litigation and filing lawsuits against these big tech companies, which in my opinion are the equivalent of big tobacco of today. They're aware of the harms and causes, and yet they're not doing anything. They care more about profit than they do the people.
And sir, let's talk about your nonprofit, Less Than Three. It's less3sc.org. Tell us where the name comes from, please.
So I wear this pin. I don't know if y'all can see it, but it's a Less Than Three pin. And Less Than Three, it was the last message that Gavin sent out before he took his life. He sent it out to friends, family members, just as a way to say, "I love you." And there was nothing else, no message or anything. So I wanted to name the nonprofit Tomorrow Needs You, because that was a powerful message that we were trying to explain to kids, because we didn't know that this was from Sextortion, but I knew that my son wasn't depressed. And whenever we started looking into the suicide numbers, the less than 3 minutes that there's a gun around on an impulsive decision, stood out as well. So we named it Less Than Three. And, this is the symbol that all the kids wear around here that allows people to understand. And just as Tim and Tamia were saying, talking to kids, knowing how many people that we have helped that get caught in these situations. I know that we've had a lot of press. I'm a public official, so a lot of people reach out to me directly. My phone rings 2 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, all across the globe, not just whether it's coming through WhatsApp or my phone directly, with me trying to help kids and direct them to the resources, or handle it directly. Less Than Three, I drive around an old hippie bus that was going to be Gavin's. It was going to be his bus that he drove off to college. And Gavin loved the sticker bomb. So we took that idea, and whenever I'm talking to kids about mental health and cyber crimes, they put stickers on the bottom of it. So the entire bottom of the bus is completely covered. And for some reason, I have the ability to connect with that teenage, high school, college age crowd. And they listen, and it amazes me how much they listen, and how trusting they can be. But, the majority of the battle is awareness, and it's making people understand that how common this is. It's us as adults not treating people the way that we don't want our children to be treated. Whenever someone makes a mistake, we want to pile on them. And that's what our kids are seeing. They're looking at someone's mistake from years ago and seeing how some kid loses a scholarship because of something he put on social media whenever he was 14, and now he's 18 and can't go to college. And we're too busy judging people for the mistakes that they made instead of looking at the person that they have become and the growth that's been there. And we've got to stop that as adults, before our kids ever have a chance. But I also believe firmly that tech is the biggest problem with it. And that's just my fight. I won't go too long on that.
Well, sir, since you brought that up, we have some of the biggest platforms on this webinar right now: Meta, TikTok, Discord, Microsoft, Apple, YouTube, Google, Snap. You've got an open audience. What would you say to them?
Same thing I've said before, you know, where I'm from, we say, don't talk about it, be about it. Y'all have the tools in front of you. You're looking too much at profits. You know, Meta specifically, they intentionally design addictive algorithms for teens. They've concealed the research. They've misled the public. We've got 42 attorney generals with lawsuits against them. That should be enough to tell you that you have the ability to stop this. Many of the tools, and I'm grateful for some of the tools that are coming out, but they're just baby steps. All of this ability is here. Snap implementing AI technology that's, you know, telling a 13-year-old girl to lose her virginity to someone that's 5 states north of them. I mean, we've got to think about the repercussions of this ability before we're putting kids on there. And it doesn't just end with them, even your Apples and Googles. I mean, Apple houses more child pornography in this world than any other company. Why do we allow people to get away with this? And, you know, Section 230 needs to be repealed. And if people could be held accountable, then we wouldn't have this issue. Because they fully know what the repercussions are. And they just don't choose to step up. That's the disheartening part.
Well, sir, thank you very much. And for everybody, once again, the foundation less-than-3sc.org. Thank you, sir. Carol, I want to talk with you next. Amanda, 15 years old. Can you tell us about her? Oh, we can't hear you yet, Carol.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
My story is a bit different because I have a daughter. And I'm actually Canadian, so I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. But I am very honored to be here. I know all of these parent stories. I've connected in some way or another or followed them using social media platforms. And I'm very sorry for your loss, and my heart just breaks when I continue to hear stories. And so my journey started back in, my daughter died by suicide, and she was a victim of sextortion and exploitation. She died on October 10th of 2012. And although we look at the calendar and we see like 2012 was almost, you know, it was 11 and a half years ago. I think what we have to see is that this is still happening. And so my daughter was victimized online when she was 12, turning 13 years old, back in 2009. And her offender continued this onslaught through various media platforms. There wasn't a Snapchat back then. Instagram had just started. And so we're talking about older platforms, even like YouTube, because there was a communication ability there. For 2.5 years, and the sextortion wasn't financial. It was traditional, which is the continuing asking of images, of videos in sexually intimate. And there was a point where my daughter said no. And so her offender shared it out on her social media, actually on her Meta platform, to about 1,000 people. And that's when her life started to spiral. Because back then, sextortion in 2012 wasn't even a word. It became a word in 2014 on the internet through dictionaries, online dictionaries. After her image was shared, the bullying, the face-to-face bullying and the cyberbullying started with her peers because no one knew what it was. So they were shaming her. They were telling her that she was a slut, that she was a whore, that this image was created because she wanted it to happen. And so the mental health, the anxiety, the depression, even moving to a new school district wasn't going to help because technology was still there. There was still communication through platforms that people could share thoughts. And I mean, when Amanda was in community sports, and so it was a very big open network of peers that she was connecting to. And so fast forward back, like she died October 10th of 2012, and that's when I started my journey of advocating. I've advocated in many places, including our government of Canada and our provincial governments, and I've met quite a few people that are on this panel beyond the parent group. In 2014, I found out that there was an investigation. So Amanda's death initially was reported on media as a bullying and cyberbullying incident. Amanda created an 8.5-minute video 5 weeks before her death just to share her story, just to empower her. And you can see that video on amandatoddlegacy.org. She shares her story, and no one really took it seriously. So when we reported that an image had been shared, the RCMP gave us a lot of tips, like take her off the internet. You need to block. And you know what, taking a child off the internet, we know that doesn't work now because they just find other avenues to get on it. In 2014, we found out that an offender had been caught. He had offended many other young victims, young girls, including gay men. He was exploiting them too, extortion. And he was from the Netherlands. And at that time, he was a 35-year-old male with a lot of connections to the underground dark web. And so that started another journey. And the Canadian government decided that they wanted to, the offender, Aidan Coban, they wanted to trial him separately in Canada, and the other victims could be trialed in Amsterdam. And so the first trial happened in 2017. Amanda couldn't be part of that one because it would be double jeopardy. 39 victims, 35 of them minors. I went to Amsterdam to watch the trial and saw Amanda's offender for the first time. And it was just like a shock to the system because I never thought that this could happen to my family, which is a message I send out strongly, is for families to listen and to take in the education that is being created, because I also thought this could never happen to my family. And so in 2017, Aidan Coban was sentenced to 10 years and 8 months in the Netherlands. He had victims from the UK, from Scotland, from Australia, from Canada, and from the US. And he sits today serving that sentence. He didn't get out on any early parole. So let's fast forward. It took 8 years to bring him to Canada. 8 long years. Appeals and approvals and signed signatures in upper court levels. And finally, in 2022, he arrived in Canada in December 2020. And in June 2022, the trial started in Vancouver. It was a 9-week trial, tons of evidence, like 100,000 pages of evidence, 12-person jury, listening to analysis of data, Facebook analysis. I found out that my daughter was victimized with 22 profiles on Facebook, and the 22 profiles belonged to that one offender. And so he constantly switched profiles from a young girl to a young boy. Amanda thought she was talking to people her own age, right? Just to wrap all this up, the trial ended in August of 2022 with guilty for the 5 charges that he was charged with. And in October of 2022, he was sentenced to 13 Canadian jail years, which is huge. It's never been done. However, because there was an extradition treaty, he had to be extradited back to the Netherlands. And the Dutch courts had to look at his Canadian sentence and modify it to meet their standards. There was a lot of argument. There was a chance he would get 0. The Dutch courts ended up changing the 13 Canadian years down to 6 years. And so he's appealed, of course, and he will start that sentence as soon as his Dutch sentence ends in August of 2024. This is horrid. What bothers me is that sextortion and exploitation, this is child abuse, child sexual abuse. And we need to talk about it as child sexual abuse. And we need to pound it, like parents listen to the word exploitation or sextortion and they run away because my child would never do that. They're too smart. But child sexual abuse, technology facilitated, those words have been around for a long time. We have to find ways to get parents, law enforcement, government officials, social media platform people to sit up and listen and take this seriously, because they'll look at the percentages and say, oh, well, it's just one child here and one minor there, and right, it's not real. Kids are not indispensable. Kids are valued. There are children. And it's really sad that I'm sitting here with 5 other parents who have lost children due to suicide, due to technology facilitated exploitation, sextortion, whether it's financial or traditional, it doesn't matter. Our children have lost their lives. We have lost our children. Every day, there is not a day that I wake up that I don't think about my daughter. And it's been 11.5 years. And every one of these parents will probably go through the same motions as I have for days, minutes, and years to come. And that's why we have to do something proactive to make this stop, to decrease the effects, to make people listen. I'm an educator. I teach in a school district, and I talk to parents and I talk to educators, other teachers, and I don't know how many people out there don't know what exploitation/sextortion is. So what are we doing wrong, or what do we have to do better? And that's why I've been on this journey along with everyone else for the last 11.5 years, and I won't stop until I grow old and tired, but I won't stop. So thank you.
Carol, thank you for not stopping. Thank you for sharing your story and Amanda's story with us today. Thank you for doing this. Roz, let's go to you. You're in Scotland. Thank you for joining us despite the time difference. Tell us about Murray, 16 years old.
Yeah, hello, it's lovely to meet everybody. So Murray's story is the same horrible story as Jordan, James and Gavin's. He was a lovely, funny, kind boy. He had 2 brothers that he adored. He was in the middle, so he was very much the glue that sat between both of them. It was just Christmas time this year, so in 2023. We'd been at my parents' for that side of the family's Christmas. We came home, we had a perfectly normal evening. He went up to his room, and by the next morning he was dead. The police obviously took away his phone and laptop, because that's normal in Scotland if there's an unexplained suicide. And the police obviously suspected something because, you know, there was no history of mental illness. He was perfectly happy. He was meant to be going to the football that day. They spoke to his friends. They confirmed there'd been absolutely no sign that there was anything wrong with Murray at all. But we still had 2 weeks of questioning every interaction we'd had, and had we missed that our son was horribly depressed and just unhappy, and it was awful. But then sort of what we found out 2 weeks later from the police, once they'd managed to get onto his phone and analyse the data, was almost worse. So they discovered that he had been contacted at 9:15 that night by somebody pretending to be a young girl. The same story, exchange of messages. We haven't seen the messages yet because it's an ongoing investigation. In fact, I don't even know which platform it was, but I'm assuming it was either Snapchat or Instagram, because that's the 2 that Murray was on. He shared an intimate picture, and then it immediately transpired it was a scammer, and they started hounding him for money. We know that the perpetrators were in Nigeria, so where we are now is Police Scotland have been amazing. We've got a preservation order with whichever platform it is, but we still haven't got the data because they're apparently so swamped with requests for data for these kind of investigations, they can't keep up with that. So not only can the platforms not be bothered to put in the protections to stop this happening, they can't be bothered to employ enough people to fulfill the requests they're getting for the data. Given the billions they're making in profit, I think that's the very least they could do. So we've got the preservation order with the platform, and then sort of IP and so on data is sitting with Nigerian authorities, and we're trying to get them to investigate in the Nigerian side to try and identify the perpetrators, but we don't know if that's going to happen or not.
These stories are why we have to do something, why we've convened this webinar. And for the parents on this call, first of all, thank you so much, John, Brandon, Carol, Tim, Tamia, Roz. In the next couple of minutes, when we go to the next panel, could all of you just look at the chat? There are so many messages to you about condolences, support, inspiration. They're to you. So thank you for sharing your story. Please take a look at those incredible messages, and we will come back to you at the end. Thank you all so very much. For everyone on this webinar, we do have the Q&A box open. Please feel free to submit your questions, whether it is for our parents panel or the next panel or the one after that, and we'll try to get to those as much as we can. We will also be collecting all these resources and sending them to everyone on this webinar later on this week. All right, our second panel now is with child protection agencies and researchers. We're going to explore now what we know and what the scope of the problem is at this moment. Catherine Riffenbark is the director of Cyber Tipline Public Reports in the Exploited Children's Division at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, where she has worked for over 13 years. Stephen Sowers, the director of cybertip.ca, Canada's national tip line for reporting the online sexual exploitation of children, which is operated by the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Annabelle Turner is the director of CyberSafe Scotland and barrister specializing in children's rights. CyberSafe supports children and young people with their experiences of online abuse, harassment, and exploitation, including sextortion. They've recently supported Roz Doe, mother of Murray, who we just heard from. And Paul Raphael, Network Contagion Research Institute. One of his friends was a victim of sextortion just last year, and Paul is a senior intelligence analyst at NCRI and lead author on their report on financial sextortion. Thank you all very much for being here. Catherine, I want to start with you. What is the trend that you can detect from the tips that you're giving? Can you give us sort of some statistics that will paint a picture of the scope?
Yes, thank you. And to start off with, I did just want to take a moment to thank the parents who shared their child's story today. And I wanted to acknowledge that all of us at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, we stand with you in the devastation that this type of victimization has caused your family. Every day at the National Center, we hear similar stories, similar calls from family members and children that are impacted by financial sextortion. And as was illustrated in the stories that they shared, we most often see financial sextortion impacting males between the ages of 15 and 17 years old. It is very quickly escalating from that first contact between the extorter and the child to then those blackmail occurring. The threats are very real that these extorters are making, and the children often feel hopeless. As we saw today, many children have died by suicide due to this victimization. I also want to note that we also see cases now where even if the child refuses to send an explicit picture to the extorter, that extorter is threatening to create an explicit picture of the child using generative AI and then using that to blackmail the child. We first started seeing financial sextortion reports coming into the National Center through our cyber tip line in early 2022. And at the beginning, we really saw those reports coming in directly from members of the public, from the children themselves or their parents. After we noticed this trend, we worked with companies and law enforcement to let them know that we were seeing an increase in these reports. We quickly saw ICACs as well as federal agencies come together and collaborate to make sure that there was a coordinated law enforcement response and that there weren't multiple agencies working on those same cases. We on our side started working on developing public messaging around this issue to make sure that the public was aware of the risks that were occurring to children. Then in June of 2022, we held a roundtable with companies, which included social media companies, as well as the financial payment platforms. We also had law enforcement there and other NGOs to talk about this issue. Following that meeting, we saw an increase in the reports that were coming in from those companies who were able to detect this behavior on their platform and report it into the cyber tip line. When we take a look at the numbers that we've seen, the first year in 2022, we received over 10,700 reports through our cyber tip line regarding financial sextortion. And last year, that number doubled. We received over 26,600 financial sextortion reports to cyber tip line.
And so break that down for us. That's how many per week? That's a lot, right?
Yes, it is. And I didn't do that math in advance, so I apologize.
No, that's okay.
But yes, we see quite a few coming in every single week that we're here at the National Center. Like I said, when we were talking directly to members of the public, it's something that our team is dealing with every day, and that averages to about 500 reports a week.
And what we want to tell our audience right now is about the Take It Down tool that you have. We're going to try to put that up so everyone can see it. Can you tell us what this tool does? And I think you have some stats on that as well.
Yes. So our Take It Down tool was launched in December of 2022. This was developed because when children were reporting into us, they were often indicating that they were scared to talk to their parents or to talk to law enforcement. And they were also indicating that the top reason that they were reporting into us was to get help with removing images or videos online. So to meet that need, we created Take It Down, which is an anonymous way for kids to get help with removing images and videos of them online. If they have that nude, partially nude, or explicit picture of them when they are under 18, they can go to this website. They do have to have the picture or video on their device. Once on that website, they're able to point to that picture or video on their phone or computer. That picture or video never leaves their device. We are simply capturing the unique file information called a hash value. And then that hash value is available for participating companies who can then scan their platforms to locate instances of that picture or video, remove that from their platforms, and report it into the National Center. This is now translated into over 25 languages. And last year, we received over 48,000 submissions, and those submissions contained over 89,000 hash values. That averages to around 900 submissions a week, or about 1,700 hash values coming through this platform every single week. So it's definitely a tool that is being utilized frequently by minors.
Catherine, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Stephen, I want to go to you. You're the director of cybertip.ca. Catherine mentioned about generative AI, and I wonder if you've been seeing a rise in use of generative AI and deepfakes in some of these sextortion cases.
Yeah, we're certainly starting to see more of that happening. This is a problem actually that happened even before generative AI. We were seeing individuals take images from social media and edit them using Photoshop, using simple photo editors to make it look like a sexual picture, and then sharing that back to kids and saying they were going to distribute that to family, friends, schools. And so generative AI has really just added to this problem. It's exacerbated it, really. It's made it so much simpler to create images, sexual images off of social media, photos that have been posted. You can pretty much do whatever you want, and it's a simple search to find these tools. There's really no guardrails there at all for individuals who are looking to create these.
No guardrails at all. That's a scary thought. Annabelle, I want you to weigh in here. You're the director of CyberSafe in Scotland. And we have actually a question in the chat that is asking, today's webinar is sort of focused on English language regions and countries. But the question from Kieran is, have we been seeing this trend identified in other regions and languages? What have you been seeing? And is this really a global problem that you've detected?
Yeah, so with the children and young people we work with who are younger, predominantly between 10 and 12 years of age, they will, the experiences they're currently describing usually relate to perpetrators in, they identify them as, a lot of them as it being in India, quite a lot of them as being in the US, quite a lot of them as being, some of them as being in the UK. and that then has an impact on the response that they receive from the justice system here. It has an immediate impact on that. And I think there's a considerable challenge around children need to have a meaningful response to reporting at a very early age. And I think that is an area where we need to do so much more. The children at the moment don't believe that they've got an effective route to reporting through the platforms themselves. And they're perfectly capable of being taught. And there's so much that we do at Cybersec, so much that we can all do on this call to help children to identify sexual assault. But if there are individuals from platforms on this call, as you've already said, Mark, I would really encourage you as a matter of urgency to delineate on your platforms between the seriousness of reports. We almost need a big red button for sexual assault for them.
Yeah, big red button, because some of these children, as we've heard, were looking for help. How do I delete my account? How do I get help, etc.? Perhaps making it easier, a very clear way to get that help.
Yeah. Also in the chat I'd seen earlier, obviously it's fantastic to have representatives from all around the world here. And we've already had people in the chat mentioning the experiences in the global south. You know, this is a global crime. Children are just as vulnerable there. On Omegle last year, that lots of children reported how when they would be flicking through videos, they would see an adult with a child in the room on the videos when the adult was exposing themselves. So their experiences of sexual violence are very, you know, they're witnessing that firsthand. We've got a lot of children who have had those experiences firsthand.
You're right. And just scrolling through the chat earlier, I saw people from Brazil and Nigeria and Canada, of course, and Scotland and all these other countries. So we thank everyone from around the world for joining us today. Paul, I want to go to you next. You're with NCRI. NCRI just put out this really groundbreaking report. Your byline is on it. And I wonder if you can tell us sort of the headlines out of that report, and if you also want to address the generative AI issue.
Hey, absolutely, Mark. Great question. So yeah, with the NCRI report that came out in January, we were the first ones to name the Yahoo Boys as the distributed group of fraudsters in Nigeria who are responsible for a majority or a principal threat actor in this current surge right now. As Catherine mentioned, within the last 18 to 24 months, there's been just an astronomical surge of these cases, and a majority of those cases are attributable to these criminals. Our report shined a spotlight on the Yahoo Boys, their tactics, their techniques, their procedures. We uncovered their videos that they were using to share with each other, their how-to guides on how to extort people, their scripts running through the entire blackmail situation. These are all publicly out in the open on TikTok, on YouTube, on Scribd, on Instagram. And these criminals are acting with impunity. They think they aren't going to get caught, and in 99.9% of cases, they aren't caught. So, yeah, we were able to uncover basically that entire criminal ecosystem that was going on behind the scenes. From the AI perspective, it is still the minority of cases. We're still seeing most of these cases, they're actually eliciting a real photo from the victim. AI is going to make these cases more prevalent. Just as someone mentioned earlier, there's the Nudify app and the Close Off app, all these things that, you can take a normal photo of someone and then use that to extort them. So yeah, things are probably going to get a little bit worse in that regard.
And for our attendees on this webinar, that report can be found at networkcontagion.us, networkcontagion.us. We'll certainly include that on the notice that we send out here to attendees later this week. Thank you all of our panelists, Catherine, Annabelle, Stephen, Paul, really appreciate that very much. And to go to your point, Annabelle, about the global issue, we have someone in the Q&A that says, we see the same trends over here in Switzerland. So clearly an issue that does not have a geographic boundary. Thank you very much for this second panel. We appreciate it very much. Our final panel of the webinar now is law enforcement, tech, and finance. What are some solutions that can be implemented right away? We've already had a lot of tips and advice. Let's get some more right now. Ron Appel is the Division Chief of Cybercrime Operations for the Department of Homeland Security. Luke Lack is a former Secret Service Special Agent combating sextortion. He was really leading the effort to travel to the Ivory Coast in February of 2023 to present a target that was then arrested, dealing with extradition issues there as well. Still working on that case now, special agent with the Department of Defense fighting on this issue. Thank you so much for being with us. Brad Thorne, financial crimes detective at the Boise Police Department and on the Mountain West Cyber Fraud Task Force, the U.S. Secret Service Task Force officer. He has tracked down cases to Nigeria, and certainly one of his main points is trying to inspire other law enforcement agencies to track down every single case. We're going to talk about that. Jim Cole, retired special agent, Homeland Security Investigations, Chair Emeritus at Interpol Specialist Group on Crimes Against Children, and Chief of Law Enforcement Operation Light Shine. We have Joseph Weaver, former SNAP Incorporated Trust and Safety, proactive investigations lead. He was the first to identify Sextortion on the Snapchat platform and was the lead researcher on the topic from 2022 until the time that he departed Snap in 2023. Thank you, sir, for your perspective here. And we have Dave Pilot, Vice President of Fraud at U.S. Bank. He leads U.S. Bank's financial crimes disruption team. They're focused on finding ways to play offense and get between the bad guys and their targets and their victims. Thank you all so very much for lending your really unique perspectives here across those industries. So Ron, let's start with you. What are you seeing on this topic? What are some solutions that our stakeholders on this webinar can put into practice today?
I think Ms. Woods said it really well. We've traditionally been firefighters on this and looking at proactive solutions and how can we get ahead of this. For HSI, for years, we've had a victim-centric approach, but even that, it's almost too late to get to the victims after they report because this crime happens so fast. We've done a number of things where we've started a campaign, Know to Protect, which was launched by the Secretary last week in Times Square. Those resources are online for DHS.gov, Know to Protect, getting that awareness out. And I'll let Luke talk about some of the challenges with the Ivory Coast. We split early on when we started seeing this trend. We split with the FBI, where they would take the lead on cases out of Nigeria, and HSI would take the lead on cases out of Cote d'Ivoire. Since then, we've traveled over there. I've met with the Minister of Interior, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Defense over there, which is equivalent to our Attorney General, Secretary of Homeland Security, and Secretary of Defense. I think some of the political pressure that the U.S. is putting on Cote d'Ivoire has had a little bit of an effect. And I'll throw out some numbers. I know Catherine from NICNIC mentioned the numbers, but just specifically out Cote d'Ivoire, last year between January and March, we saw 4,300 cyber tips come in on sextortion. That had a 40% U.S. victim rate in it. There was 1,747 victims out of that. After some of the outreach messages to youth, adults, the diplomatic efforts over there, the cyber tips are still increasing. They're at 7,400 cyber tips for sextortion, but only 200 U.S. victims. At least 7% decrease in U.S. victims coming out of the Ivory Coast. Now less than 3% of the total cyber tips are involving U.S. victims. So there is preventive measures that we could do. I think it's going to take a global solution to push towards specific countries, especially the Ivory Coast. I know we've briefed our ambassador several times there to push that message to the Ivorian government.
Ron, thanks very much. You mentioned this, so we just want to put it up for the attendees here. The Know to Protect campaign, as you mentioned, just announced by the Secretary of Homeland Security. You can get to that website very simply at dhs.gov/know to protect. And when you get to that webpage, one of the points that we want to point out, and as we bring it up here, you'll see that on the very top of the webpage, there is a Take Action tab. If we scroll down just slightly, we'll see it. There's a bunch of headers, and right there, Take Action. And so as we talk about solutions on this panel, for all the attendees, whether you are a parent, whether you're a stakeholder, you're in industry, please feel free to go there to this website, dhs.gov/ know to protect. So Ron, thank you very much for mentioning that. Luke, I want to go to you next. You have talked about that there are resources for law enforcement, particularly local law enforcement, that think, look, we're a department of 30 people, we're a department of 70 people. How in the world can we possibly deal with this crime of sextortion? But you've got some great experience and knowledge of where local departments can go to get help.
Yeah, certainly. So when we first got involved in the Secret Service, I worked in a unit in headquarters called the Global Investigative Operations Center. I mean, we were approached with the first sextortion case that led us to Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa. And when I opened that case, I named it Operation Nowhere to Hide because we were initially told before we opened it that a lot of these actors are in West Africa. Cote d'Ivoire, for example, doesn't have an extradition treaty. When we first went there, this was before the FBI was able to get justice for Jordan Demay and extradite out of Nigeria. So at the time, there had been no extraditions, and we knew we were going to a country with no mutual legal assistance treaty. So we still did. We worked with their government and had success in getting some arrests. But where I wanted to go from there was we started working with local law enforcement and partnering with local law enforcement all across the country, because it's easy to say, hey, you're the Secret Service, you're the FBI, you're the HSI, you're the federal government with all these money and all these resources. We can't do this with our department. I started reaching out to people and saying, hey, you can still identify these people you work this case, and you'll shortly hear from Detective Thorne. But I really want to sing his praises before he even has a chance to speak for himself. He was a prime example of one of the detectives that contacted me, and I gave him some go-bys for search warrants on how to link accounts by cookies through Google, or how to compare IP addresses across accounts. And with just a single victim in his district, he was able to completely work the case, take every piece of advice I have and really run with it, and prove that even a local department that seemingly doesn't have worldwide jurisdiction can track all the way back to these actors and identify somebody in Nigeria or Cote d'Ivoire. And I won't spoil his story. He can kind of go further on where we went from there. But my kind of call to action is any local detectives, any local, state, tribal, or international, if you're federal with the United States, or you're our partners in Canada or any other countries we've worked with, feel free to contact me. I'll make my email address public. There's more than enough work to go around, so I can share any kind of go-bys, successes we've had, how we link accounts, how we identify people, how we tie it up with crypto tracing, anything that you might need help with. I'll hop on the phone or shoot you an email, and we can break it down so that anybody can go after these sextortion actors.
And Luke, just real quick before we go to Brad, you were telling us about the Secret Service facility in Alabama and how local law enforcement might be able to benefit there. Can you just mention that?
Yes, sir. So the Secret Service runs, and disclaimer again, I'm now a special agent of the Department of Defense, prior with the Secret Service, who are still my good friends and I still do a lot of work with. So I like to toot their horn a lot. They run a school called the National Computer Forensic Institute, or NCFI, in Hoover, Alabama. It's a school they run where they'll send local and state law enforcement to training on sextortion. Actually, they're starting to build a training on, but any kind of cyber training or computer forensics. The school is 100% on the Secret Service. They'll pay for your flight, they'll pay for your hotel, your per diem, and they send you home with thousands of dollars worth of equipment, with just the agreement that you'll be a partner with the Secret Service. If you're interested, contact your local Secret Service field office.
Incredible. Thank you, Luke. And hopefully the Secret Service is paying you for promotion, even though you're not there anymore.
Thank you, sir.
Brad, let's go to you. Perfect segue here. You're in Boise, Idaho. Somebody might think, what is Boise doing tracking down people being on the leading edge here of sextortion? But you've really created a great model and showing that it can be done from local law enforcement. Tell us about your experience and your takeaways, your calls to action for attendees.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Luke. He was great, by the way. He flew down within a week of me calling him to go over all the information that I had. And I'm local. Some of you probably don't even know where Boise is. But I've been an officer for 25 years, a detective for 17. And for me, we see sextortion cases come in so often. And I had a friend actually commit suicide because of sextortion, and in a neighboring agency, and nothing was done. And so as an officer, I'm thinking there's got to be something done. And so I started doing outreach and things like that. And I got a call from a mother one day that, because of an article that I did, because their son at a local university was being sextorted. And so I started calling and saying, what can I do here? Called Luke, called our Secret Service in Boise is great. Aaron West is part of a cryptocurrency coalition. And so I just started calling to find out what I could do. Preservation letters, search warrants were then sent out. And I even called the EFCC, who's done now 3 cases for me, and they're helping me on this one. The biggest problem with that is 2 of them were prosecuted there. And the sentencing is 3 years or 3 million NAR, which is $2,000 in US American. So, one of my victims, gives $3,000. So, I mean, they're out right away. So, anyway, with this one, preservation letters, Google, Snap, all of them. And that led me to following the money. And in the chat, there was something that said crypto is almost impossible to trace. But that's actually the crux of this case. It was being paid through Cash App, who I know isn't on here, and exchanged USD for BTC. And those wallets were what gave me a suspect. I was able to trace those through TRM Labs, Explorer, and get KYC from the accounts. And then from the search warrants, it all led into identifications. And the other problem, of course, with the case is it's a year old, and I'm still looking at Gmails and trying to identify other actors. We have one currently in custody right now in the UK, and hopefully we'll get more. And my call to action is that if I can do it here in Boise, where a bunch of people don't know it is, then anybody can do it. And it's just a matter of putting in the effort, search warrants, learning the new technology. I mean, I'm 50 years old and learned how to trace crypto. Anybody can do it. And there's resources out there, like guys like Luke and the Secret Service here, and everybody has FBI and that in their area. Reach out to them. And one of my big points on this is this case has over 1,000 victims now. And I went around calling as many as I could. And one of them I called, and he'd been in it 6 months, and he had planned on committing suicide within the next week. He didn't see another way out. I was the first person that he talked to. And I kept a conversation with him for the next couple of weeks and got him out of the sextortion, and he still reaches out because he's part of the case. But just from somebody reporting in Boise and me following up, because I only have 2 victims in Boise and out of the 1,000. And just by contacting as many as I possibly can, maybe we stopped a suicide there just from one person reporting, which is why reporting is so important. And I'll give you 2 more things and pass it off to the next one. Gavin's Law out of South Carolina is huge. It's the only law that has an education piece, meaning the board of, or the it has to be taught from like 6th grade on appropriately in school. I think that's huge. I'd love to see that. And I'm pushing for that here in Idaho as well. Because if we can start in schools, that's where we can stop it from happening. When I was in school, they sent you to a different class. The boys went here, the girls went here, and they talked about that's a perfect time to start with cyberbullying and cybersecurity. And so that needs to happen. I think I will concur that with these 1,000 victims, I've got a victim in Germany, Australia, as well as the UK. So it's not in one area, it's a global issue. And contacting 17-year-olds from this is very hard. And so if we had a area that we had one reporting agency, it would be much easier for somebody like me to go to IC3 and run through it, or Sentinel and run through it. But if we had one, because trying to find a 17-year-old who's going to college the next year, which I found multiple of them, is difficult. So that's my to local law enforcement. You can do more. And just because there's not a suicide involved in it, you may be preventing a suicide by continuing following up. And so, yeah, anybody can do it if I can do it.
And Brad, I think that's the motto of the day. You can do more, right? So very well said. We have some really great questions coming in, so please add your question to the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Jim, I want to go to you next. This is a perfect segue here. You're a retired special agent from Homeland Security Investigations, and I know you feel very strongly that law enforcement agencies, stakeholders on this call should walk away with action items. So what would you suggest? What are your top tips?
Yeah, so one, huge kudos to Brad. A lot of local law enforcement are intimidated by these cases. They walk in and oftentimes like, well, these guys are in Africa, so there's just nothing we can do. We're a local law enforcement agency. And so I would love to get Brad on steroids and get him out and Luke as well. And some of the folks like, we have some phenomenal agents in my former agency, HSI, FBI, that can train local law enforcement agencies. So I think local law enforcement has to, they act local, but they have to think globally. And that's a mindset that we kind of got to really proliferate out there. And so it's about training. It's about getting training to these local law enforcement departments, because like Brad said, if a local agency can look at a case for what it actually is, that it is a criminal organization, a global network that will tie into cases not only around the country, but around the world, which means like Brad's case, 1,000 victims. I mean, I had a case where we had over 4,000 victims that were being sextorted by a group of 35 male offenders who were working in concert with each other. And so the ability to scale by these criminal organizations to impact so many families and devastate like the families that spoke in the first panel. Like I believe that there are many more suicides that are attributed to this crime than are in our statistics, because so many law enforcement agencies have responded to a suicide and just looked at it like, well, it's a child suicide. And they haven't looked at the digital devices. They haven't looked at what the issue was that caused it being potentially sextortion. And so we have to really look at this as like, a pandemic in the way that we've looked at other things as pandemics, because the devastation it's causing, I mean, you heard firsthand from these families. I can't even imagine what those families have gone through. And so it's just critically important that we get training out there to our law enforcement agencies. And like I put my LinkedIn, one of my biggest issues is prevention. We got to get in the schools because if we can harden the target, that's really how we'll move the needle. It is very difficult. Like look, even the cases where we have been able to investigate and extradite are a fraction of the number of cases that are actually in existence, right? Because there are so many barriers to that, and it can be done. It absolutely can be done. And I know that HSI and FBI and other organizations are working very hard to ensure that we're opening up more channels to do more of that. But really, the way we move the needle is we harden our children and their families and their parents. One of my biggest frustrations is everybody talks about trafficking, but most people think trafficking is kidnappings and abductions. Those of us in law enforcement will tell you that's nonsense. It isn't kidnappings and abductions. What's happening is your child's being kidnapped on this device. Your child this is where the crime is happening. So parents who are concerned about their child being kidnapped off their front porch or their backyard are allowing their children to sit on that front porch in their backyard on this device. And this is where it's happening. And so it's really about educating our children and our parents and our teachers and just anyone collectively who has responsibility for a child in where the real threats are and how to counteract those threats and how to harden the target.
Really great points, Jim, and thank you. And thank you for framing it as a pandemic. I think that really describes the scope here. Joseph, I want to go to you. You were leading research at SNAP on sextortion from 2022 until you left in 2023. We have social media platforms on here, and I want to get your perspective on this issue. What can the social media platforms do? What should they be doing?
I think they have a very distinct responsibility to handle this all as aggressively and ambitiously as they can, and I'm not sure they're doing that. Some are working harder than others. Big tech can have like a very quick and specific influence, positive influence on the situation, but I have to go back to what everybody else on this panel has hit, is that education really is the main thing, right? Everything else is reactive. Tech, even if you can get full buy-in from tech to solve this problem, they'll have to do it after it's happened so that they can research what the signals look like, how to build engineering tools to solve it. The real solution to this is teaching our kids what this looks like, right? It's been called out that our kids are specifically soft targets right now, and that's very true. I would point out that young boys specifically are the softest targets because we don't generally spend a lot of time teaching them when they're little to avoid things like this. Young girls are pretty much taught that they will be put in situations probably throughout their life that they need to be aware of. We haven't taught young boys properly how to identify this stuff and report it, how to react, how to mentally deal with it, and they are the softest targets here. From my time at Snap, I can tell you that the scale and scope of this is a piece that's not talked about enough. It's reasonable to say that every single person on social media is targeted for sextortion. The outcome is that the young men are the people who respond, right? Like if you're on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok and you get a weird friend request that you don't recognize, that's sextortion. You don't respond to it because you're not interested in talking to someone you don't know, or you're savvy enough to realize that you're being targeted for some sort of fraud or something. But young men and young girls, young boys aren't aware yet of what that is. These bad actors are spamming the entire social media network, and the people that respond tend to be young boys because they're unprepared. Sometimes it's young girls as well. I think I've thought of this a lot, and there's sort of like a 3-point solution. I think education is far and away should be the highest priority. In my opinion, federal agencies need to work to create awareness campaigns, very large awareness campaigns, right? Gavin's law, I think that's genius. This should be a federally, a nationwide law, or at least every state should have something like this in place. The truth is, if we can educate kids very early on this, it will stop right away. If kids can see the signs of sextortion are very obvious, right? Somebody who knows what they're looking for will see this right away and just won't get involved with it. We can do that very quickly. The second piece, I think, is creating deterrence from foreign governments. We can do that through, chasing down bad actors, holding them to account. That clearly is not something that's going to happen right away, but creating deterrence will help dramatically. And I think the third piece clearly is, I can speak to this, is putting pressure on big tech. Tech can stop this, but it will be slow. And sort of the piece I can tell you from, investigating hundreds of thousands of cases of this is that these bad actors will adapt, right? So as easy as it sounds to solve this, and tech can and should do much, much more, the bad actors will adapt immediately, right? This is financially motivated. They just want the money. So they'll shift their tactics by using VPNs and other, sort of data signal switches that will allow them to evade just long enough to keep making money. So while that's a huge point I think we need to focus on, education and deterrence are probably going to be more effective in the long run.
Joseph, I have a real quick follow-up for you before we go to Dave, because we're running out of time. We have a question from Paul, who wanted to know how many law enforcement organizations in this webinar actually have a direct contact point for the big tech companies, Meta, Snap, TikTok, and how hindered are they by the lack of true response from the network? So my question to you is, you worked at one of these social networks. How easy or hard is it for a local law enforcement organization to get a hold of you at a tech network when there is an investigation like this?
I mean, I can say forthright that there are many channels. Snap particularly does a ton of outreach with law enforcement, but they're pretty narrow channels, right? These have to happen through documented legal channels. through our websites and through our tracked sources, there's not a phone call that they can pick up and make. And I wish that was the case. That said, Snap makes a lot of efforts to answer all of these as quickly as possible. As I understand it, and from my friends who have been involved with this, Meta has a very deep problem with this. They're just not responding to these things as quick as they should, possibly because they're just it's a massive platform, right? The channels do exist. It's not as easy as it should be, is my real answer there.
Thank you, sir. And Dave, we're going to wrap up the panel with you. You lead the U.S. Bank Financial Crime Disruption Team, and I want to know from you, what do financial institutions need to do from your perspective? Oh, sir, you're muted. No, we can't hear you. There we go. I think maybe that will work. Yes. No, now yes. Try now.
Nothing?
Now we hear you. Yes, we hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Webinars from hotel rooms at conferences. Nothing ever works. So, in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus in on a couple of things. As banks, and my team does this here, I'm actually at a conference in Pittsburgh this week with 900 of my closest friends across the industry in law enforcement, other public-private partnerships. We're having these same conversations in the conference panels, in the hallways, et cetera. Banks know that we have to get better at sharing information, and every law enforcement person on this panel is trying to hide laughter right now, because through your whole careers, you have asked banks for info and they've said, well, we can't give you that. Give me a subpoena, file the paper, whatever. It's frustrating. And Tim Woods, actually, when you were speaking early on, you said from your side of the equation, it felt like the laws were actually hamstringing you from getting progress. You thought the system worked a certain way. Here's a set of rules that was slowing everything down. The same thing happens in our industry on this side of the equation. What I and my team are finding is that a lot of times the information, it's not that it can't be shared, it's that nobody ever did it before. 10 years ago, nobody was thinking about something like sextortion. There are plenty of indicators here that could be immediately helpful to law enforcement, to advocacy groups, to other areas that can be freely shared. Banks have to get down that path. And again, the conference I'm at this week, that's a big focus of it. We're trying, right? But we also need help from other organizations to help educate some of our friends in DC about how some of their well-intended laws and rules and regs do create unintentional hamstrings and choke points that put people like the Woodses, the rest of the parents here, all of us who are trying to solve it. Our government needs to help us pave the path, not put up roadblocks that impede progress. I think banks have a role to play, partly in leading the charge in sharing that information, connecting those dots, and sort of framing out how it can work. I also think we have a role we can play with the feds, and we work on those things quite a bit, as you would imagine. But ultimately, we all know the real cost here. We can't be afraid to push the boundaries. The hot reels exist. Okay, cool. Don't step on a landmine, but don't be afraid of the boundaries. Don't be afraid to get outside the lines. That comes back to getting our hearts and our minds in the right place. And I'll just close with this, and it'll sound funny coming from a guy who works at a bank, but all of us just spent the last 90 minutes getting it completely re-underscored for us why this sort of crime and the activities that we see is not about the P&L. This is not about the bottom line. We've also talked quite a bit about big tech and those companies and frustrations there. For them, it's 100% about the bottom line. That's where the reticence comes from. It's the same way for banks at times, but those of us who are in roles where we can connect these dots and make these stories real, make them human, and push the envelope and create ways to build bridges. I mean, I hired a bunch of retired Secret Service guys for a reason. I want to push the boundaries. I want to connect the dots. I want to find ways to put the bad guys under the jail. The other piece is, you know what? We've also talked about there are limits with law enforcement sometimes. different countries, different regions, geopolitical pressures, you name it. We all also need to be thinking about actual disruption. So maybe law enforcement can't do it, but if we share enough information and we all have enough indicators and we know who the threat actors are, there's somebody on this call who can help aggregate all of that information and start doing offensive cyber disruption to these threat actors. Why aren't we having those conversations? I've got data that can support it. Everybody on this panel has data that can support it. Parents of victims have information that may go to local law enforcement, but not be broadly shared, but that could support it. We have to start having those conversations. I'll leave my soapbox there, but enough of coming after our kids. We need to decide we're all going to play offense, and then we need to do it. Somebody needs to get hurt.
What a way to end this panel. Dave, Joseph, Jim, Brad, Ron, Luke, thank you all so much for lending your expertise to this. We really appreciate it. And now we're going to end this webinar where we began, back with the families that have been so impacted by this. We want to thank all the families for joining us on this call. And John DeMay, I was hoping that perhaps you could give us some final thoughts here as we round out this webinar, and then we'll have some final remarks. John?
Yeah, so much information, a lot of great speakers, and absolutely amazing information here today. But the big,
Not sure I understand.
The big takeaway here, and I think it was starting to get hit on a lot towards the end here, is the social media. You know, these big tech companies, and Section 230 that Brandon spoke about is absolutely archaic. Social media companies aren't even going to consider any change until Section 230 is actually repealed in its complete, or it's completely revamped, because social media companies essentially can literally do illegal things and hide under the veil of that Section 230. I was at a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C. a few months ago, and these companies go before the Senate hearings, and they say the same things every time, and they're doing all these things, and it's a bunch of fodder, but nothing actually gets done. And I think until Section 230 has some drastic changes, and families like the ones that are on here and other victims start suing the pants off these companies, and they have to open up their pocketbook and pay, then they're not going to change. And it's sad because, you know, my son and all these other victims, my son was only, what, 4, 5, 6 hours. Some of them were days. I know there's 24 other families that aren't even on this panel that I text regularly that are going through the same thing, in hours and days and months this happened to them. And so these things can easily be caught on social media, but they're not doing it because they don't need to at this point. So, you know, IP address tracking would be another. Why are tech companies allowing one IP address to have multiple accounts on one device? I mean, that should be red flag. So there's all the little things that can be happening with social media companies that are not doing anything. And until they get sued and lose a bunch of money, they're not going to change. And they keep keep telling us the same story, right? But my position is, I'm a small business owner, and I've never been sued in the 17 years I've been running my business, because my business is above board. If social media companies were actually operating above board, they wouldn't need Section 230 to protect them. And that's what I have to say about them. And there's other legislation that needs to happen too. There's Nicosia, I believe, might even be on this call. They're really pushing for some change. They lobbied for some bills that are on the Senate floor. There's the Kids Online Safety Act, which is a great bill. I think it's being sponsored by like 70 or 75 senators right now. It's just sitting around. I have no idea. I think it might be on the House side now, but things like that need to happen, so we get those awareness and education pieces in, and hopefully have a little bit of freedom for families to hold these tech companies accountable, so they actually shift some change. But on the backside of that, right, is what we are talking about today, is the awareness and doing all these things. I've been speaking all over the place with, you know, regular media and podcasts we've done, and documentaries and the whole thing in schools, and it has to continue, and more parents have to get involved, more victims have to get involved, because it's such a sensitive thing. A lot of people just want to sweep it under the rug, but we got to pick it up and keep pushing and keep fighting and keep people aware, and keep telling law enforcement to push a little harder and to go that extra mile, like the detectives were just talking about. Look at those phones, get those devices, push harder for the search warrants, get everything over the FBI if you need to. Jordan's case is a landmark case in the United States, and we're a perfect example that you cannot hide just because you're on the other side of the pond, and we will come for you.
John, I don't think we could have phrased a call to action better than that. So thank you so much to John, Tim, Tamia, Brandon, Carol, Roz. I want to just say this to all the parents on the call. There is a comment in the chat room from Robert, and he says this: "Good Lord, this topic is so gut-wrenching to listen to. I have goosebumps watching you all step out of the dark and into the light so that we as a community can come together to get a handle on this situation. Thanks to the families for being so brave about this topic." Alex at NCRI, back to you.
Thank you so much to our panelists, those who listened in, and especially the parents for joining us today and telling your stories and your commitment to fighting this crime. Everyone on the call, let's keep this dialogue going. I see LinkedIn's being shared in the chat, which is excellent. We need a multi-stakeholder approach. As Dave Pilot mentioned and John DeMay, we need proactive investigations, and information sharing is crucial. Let's start going on the offense. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email in the coming days that will collate lessons learned today, as well as the many links and resources that were shared on the call and in the chat. Thank you so much, and let's all stay in touch.